Good afternoon. We're reading 10 minutes from the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. And this is, shockingly, episode 21 in a row, 21 days in a row on this. And we're going to be reading from chapter 7, Mikhail Bakunin, from The State and Marxism, 1867, and from God and the State, 1870. And we're beginning on page 72, so let's just get right to it. Doubtless, such a political organization, or rather, such a reduction of political action in favor of liberty and social life, would be a great benefit for society. But it would not at all please the devoted adherents of the state. They absolutely must have a state providence, a state directing social life, dispensing justice, and administering public order. That is to say, whether they admit it or not, and even when they call themselves Republicans, and again, this is not Republicans as in Democrats and Republicans, even when they call themselves Republicans, Democrats, or even socialists, they always must have a people who are more or less ignorant, minor, incapable, or to call things by their right names, riffraff to govern. In order, of course, that doing violence to their own disinterestedness and modesty, they can keep the best places for themselves, in order always to have the opportunity to devote themselves to the common good, and that, strong in their virtuous devotion and their exclusive intelligence, privileged guardians of the human flock, while urging it on for its own good and leading it to security, they may also fleece it a little. Every logical and sincere theory of the state is essentially founded on the principle of authority. That is to say, on the eminently theological, metaphysical, and political idea that the masses, always incapable of governing themselves, must submit at all times to the benevolent yoke of a wisdom and a justice, which in one way or another is imposed on them from above. But imposed in the name of what, and by whom? Authority recognized and respected as such by the masses can have only three possible sources: force, religion, or the action of a superior intelligence. And this supreme intelligence is always represented by minorities. Slavery can change its form and its name. Its basis remains the same. This basis is expressed by the words, being a slave is being forced to work for other people, as being a master is to live on the labor of other people. In ancient times, as today in Asia and Africa, slaves were simply called slaves. In the Middle Ages, they took the name of serfs. Today, they are called wage earners. The position of these latter is much more honorable and less hard than that of slaves, but they are nonetheless forced by hunger as well as by the political and social institutions to maintain by very hard work the absolute or relative idleness of others. Consequently, they are slaves. And in general, no state, either ancient or modern, has ever been able or ever will be able to do without the forced labor of the masses, whether wage earners or slaves, as a principal and absolutely necessary basis of the liberty and culture of the political class, the citizens. Even the United States is no exception to this rule. Its marvelous prosperity and enviable progress are due in great part, and above all, to one important advantage: the great territorial wealth of North America. The immense quantity of uncultivated and fertile lands, together with a political liberty that exists nowhere else, attracts every year hundreds of thousands of energetic, industrious, and intelligent colonists. This wealth at the same time keeps off pauperism and delays the moment when the social question will have to be put. A worker who does not find work or who is dissatisfied with the wages offered by the capitalist can always, if need be, emigrate to the far west to clear there some wild and unoccupied land. This possibility always remaining open as a last resort to all American workers, naturally keeps wages at a level and gives to every individual an independence unknown in Europe. Such is the advantage, but here is the disadvantage. As cheapness of the products of industry is achieved in great part by cheapness of labor, I'm sorry, I've lost my cursor. And I seem to have frozen. This possibility always remaining open as a last resort to all American workers naturally keeps wages at a level and gives to every individual an independence unknown in Europe. Such is the advantage, but here is the disadvantage. As cheapness of the products of industry is achieved in great part by cheapness of labor, the American manufacturers, for most of the time, are not in a condition to compete against the manufacturers of Europe, from which there results for the industry of the northern states the necessity for a protectionist tariff. But that has a result. Firstly, to create a host of artificial industries, and above all, to oppress and ruin the non-manufacturing southern states and make them want secession. Finally, to crowd together into cities like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and many others, proletarian working masses who, little by little, are beginning to find themselves already in a situation analogous to that of the workers in the great manufacturing states of Europe. And we see, in effect, the social question already being posed in the northern states, just as it was posed long before in our countries. And there, too, the self-government of the masses, in spite of all the display of the people's omnipotence, remains most of the time in a state of fiction. In reality, it is minorities which govern. The so-called Democratic Party, and now in this case this is actually talking about the Democratic Party in America leading up to the Civil War. So in reality, it is minorities which govern. The so-called Democratic Party, up to the time of the Civil War to emancipate the slaves, were the out-and-out partisans of slavery and of the ferocious oligarchy of the planters, the demagogues without faith or conscience, capable of sacrificing everything to their greed and evil-minded ambition, and who, by their detestable influence and actions, exercised almost unhindered for nearly 50 years continuously, have greatly contributed to deprave the political morality of North America. The Republican Party, again, in this case, he is talking about the American Republican Party, which was pretty new at the time this was being written at the conclusion or just after the American Civil War. The Republican Party, though really intelligent and generous, is still and always a minority. And whatever the sincerity of this party of liberation, however great and generous the principles it professes, do not let us hope that, in power, it will renounce this exclusive position of a governing minority to merge into the mass of the nation so that the self-government of the people shall finally become a reality. For that there will be necessary a revolution far more profound than all those which hitherto have shaken the old and new worlds. In Switzerland, in spite of all the democratic revolutions that have taken place there, it is still always the class in comfortable circumstances, the bourgeoisie, that is to say, the class privileged by wealth, leisure, and education which governs. The sovereignty of the people, a word which, anyway, we detest because, in our eyes, all sovereignty is detestable. The government of the people by themselves is likewise a fiction. The people is sovereign in law. The people is sovereign in law, not in fact, for necessarily absorbed by their daily labor, which leaves them no leisure, and if not completely ignorant, at least very inferior in education to the bourgeoisie, they are forced to place in the hands of the latter their supposed sovereignty. The sole advantage which they get out of it in Switzerland, as in the United States, is that ambitious minorities, the political classes, cannot arrive at power otherwise than by paying court to the people, flattering their fleeting passions, which may sometimes be very bad, and most often deceiving them. It is true that the most imperfect republic is 1,000 times better than the most enlightened monarchy. For at least in the Republic, there are moments when, though always exploited, the people are not oppressed, while in monarchies they are never anything else. And then the democratic regime trains the masses little by little in public life, which the monarchy never does. But while giving the preference to the Republic, we are nevertheless forced to recognize and proclaim that whatever may be the form of government, while human society remains divided into different classes because of the hereditary inequality of occupations, wealth, education, and privileges, there will always be minority government and the inevitable exploitation of the majority by that minority. The state is nothing else but this domination and exploitation regularized and systematized. We shall attempt to demonstrate it by examining the consequence of the government of the masses of the people by a minority, at first as intelligent and as devoted as you like, in an ideal state founded on a free contract. And we'll go ahead and wrap it there. It's on page 75. Again, Mikhail Bakunin. Writing from, I'm not sure if he was actually in exile when he wrote this, in London, in Switzerland, as many of the early anarchists and early Russian socialists and German socialists were. Not the same people necessarily, some similar foundational thoughts, but their conclusions are clearly very different. So again, the conclusion of episode 21 of the Anarchist Handbook, organized by Michael Malice. We'll be back soon.